Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Double Reward. The Prophet ﷺ said that the person who reads the Qur'an masterly, the person who reads it with good command and for whom it's easy, he is like the noble angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the one who reads the Qur'an with difficulty, for him there is double reward. So the Prophet ﷺ is talking about two different kinds of people. One who has command over the Qur'an, he knows how to pronounce the letters, he understands it, he has mastery over it. So what about this person? The Prophet ﷺ says that he's like the noble angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the angels that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. This is an extremely high position and high station for somebody who masters the Qur'an. But what about somebody who's just starting out? What about somebody who has difficulty in reading the Qur'an? What about somebody for whom it's a struggle? The Prophet says, for him there is double reward. And that's why we named this program Double Reward. The purpose of this program is to help you to move from being like the first person, insha'Allah, to being like the person who has mastery over the Qur'an. But that's a tall order, and it's going to take a lot of work. And the first place to begin is with learning tajweed, or the rules of pronunciation. That's the very beginning. And that's what we're going to do, inshallah, in this program. We're going to, inshallah, read together the Qur'an so that you can listen and repeat after. Another thing we're going to do is, after we read, we're going to talk about a particular rule. We're going to explain it, give rules and drills, and give you a chance to repeat at home so that you can learn these rules. Now you may be thinking to yourself, well, I wasn't born as an Arabic speaker. I don't really know Arabic that well. Or you might be thinking to yourself, I'm very old. I'm 40 years old or I'm 45 years old. I can't memorize the Qur'an. I can't learn it. I can't be a master at reading the Qur'an. And what I'm telling you is that if you're sincere and you ask Allah, even though you don't speak English, you don't speak Arabic, or even though you're old, or even though whatever it is that you think is holding you back, you can still become a master at reading the Qur'an. But it's going to be hard. And it's going to be a challenge. But inshallah we can do it together, me and you. But I have a surprise for you. We're not going to be alone. It'll be me, you, and inshallah we have participants. Pay attention to my interaction with them. See what kind of mistakes they're making. See how they're pronouncing, and try as much as you can to repeat at home. The other surprise I have for you is that you don't have to be alone at home either. If you're a mother or a father, bring your children. If you're a spouse, bring your husband or your wife. Bring your friends and bring your relatives. Bring everybody along so that all of us together can get on this journey and ride toward being masters at reading the Qur'an. Now, the Prophet ﷺ says that when you read a letter of the Qur'an, you get 10 rewards. Let me give you an example. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alif Lam Mim. That word, we just got 30 rewards for that. We got a reward for the first letter, Alif, Lam, Mim. Now imagine if you're reading a whole verse. How many rewards are you going to get? What about a whole surah? What about the whole Qur'an? So as you can see, Allah has so much reward stored for you if you sit down and you say, I can, and I have hope that inshallah I will succeed at memorizing the Qur'an. So before we begin our program, we want to introduce our fellow travelers or introduce our fellow participants who are going to be sharing along in our experience. How are you guys? Are you all ready?
Yeah.
Yes.
Inshallah.
Osama, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm 13 and I come from Chicago.
MashaAllah. Do you consider yourself a beginner at learning the Quran, or an intermediate or an advanced person?
I consider myself a beginner.
MashaAllah. Okay. Firdaus?
Yeah, I'm from Singapore, and then my age is 24.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm considering myself as intermediate.
Okay, inshallah you'll be able to advance and you'll become higher and higher and higher.
Inshallah.
And mashallah, you have a very wonderful name, Firdaus, which means paradise.
Thank you.
Ahmed, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm 16, and I'm also from Chicago, and I'm a beginner.
MashaAllah. Feiruz?
I'm 20, I'm from Singapore, and I consider myself in the intermediate level.
Okay. Inshallah, all of us together, you guys and also our participants at home, inshallah we're going to make, inshallah, good progress.
Sure.
Now, but the very important thing here that we have to look at is our intention. Okay? Each one of you and you at home also have to think about, well, why am I doing this? And that brings us to another important point, and we're going to tell a story. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first began the da'wah, all of the believers were in Mecca. Then, as the years progressed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted the believers to make hijrah, to travel from Mecca to Medina. Now, this was a very hard thing. The believers were going to leave their belongings. They were going to leave their business. They were going to leave their all of the things that they knew, the sky that they had lived under for so many years, the earth and the land that they had become familiar with as children, as boys and as girls. They were going to leave all of that and go to Medina in obedience to Allah and in obedience to the Messenger. And Allah gave them a lot of rewards. But there was one man, when it came time to leave, he didn't go. And then finally, when he did go, he didn't go to obey the Prophet or for the pleasure of Allah. He went because he wanted to marry a lady. So then when he arrived at Medina, they were asking him, or the issue came up of why did he travel or why did he make hijrah? And he seemed to suggest that it was to obey Allah and it was to obey the Messenger. So when the Prophet heard about this, he taught us a very, very important lesson. That when you begin something, you have to begin at the beginning with a good intention and stating the clear purpose. My purpose is to please Allah and to obey the Messenger from the very beginning. It's not as good for you to come at the end and say, okay, well, this was my intention. So he taught us something and he said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى. That Allah gives you reward for your actions depending on why you did them and what your intention was. And that Allah gives you the reward for whatever your intention was. Then the Prophet said, فَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. And so, whoever made hijrah for the sake of Allah and to obey the Messenger of Allah, then Allah will give him reward for this intention. وَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ لِدُنْيَا يُصِيبُهَا أَوْ امْرَأَةٍ يَنْكِحُهَا فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى مَا هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِ. But he who made hijrah for a worldly gain or to marry a woman, then Allah will give him the reward for the intention that he set out with at the very beginning. But it's hard when you're starting something out to ask yourself, why am I doing this? And to get your intention right. But something that you can do to help you is, you can get in the habit of, before starting something, you can make dua. And you can ask Allah to bless you, to bless what you're doing, and to make what you're doing for His sake. And inshallah that will help you make an internal change. Okay, now that we've got all of that down, let's start with the Qur'an, let's start with reading. Inshallah we're going to start with Surah Al-Fatiha. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. الحمد لله رب العالمين. All the praises and thanks be to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the most gracious, the most merciful. Maliki Yawmiddin, the only owner of the Day of Judgment. إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. You alone do we worship, and you alone do we ask for help. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. Guide us to the straight way. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم. The way of those on whom you have bestowed your grace. غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Not the way of those who earned your anger, nor of those who went astray. Okay, now's your chance to practice. So we're going to say it, and please repeat after me. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
الحمد لله رب العالمين.
الحمد لله رب العالمين.
الرحمن الرحيم.
الرحمن الرحيم.
مالك يوم الدين.
مالك يوم الدين.
إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين.
إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين.
اهدنا الصراط المستقيم.
اهدنا الصراط المستقيم.
صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم.
صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم.
غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
الحمد لله رب العالمين.
الحمد لله رب العالمين.
الرحمن الرحيم.
الرحمن الرحيم.
مالك يوم الدين.
مالك يوم الدين.
إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين.
إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين.
اهدنا الصراط المستقيم.
اهدنا الصراط المستقيم.
صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم.
صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم.
غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
الحمد لله رب العالمين.
الحمد لله رب العالمين.
الرحمن الرحيم.
الرحمن الرحيم.
مالك يوم الدين.
مالك يوم الدين.
إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين.
إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين.
اهدنا الصراط المستقيم.
اهدنا الصراط المستقيم.
صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم.
صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم.
غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
Ameen. Now, it's very important when you're reading a surah to think about its meaning. And of course, all of us have read Surah Al-Fatiha many times, and we know it, and maybe we think it's not quite an extraordinary surah. But actually, it's an amazing surah. This surah is so important that Allah asked us to read it 17 times a day during all of our prayers. Would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ask us to read a surah that many times unless it was important? And that's why Surah Al-Fatiha is very, very important. And inshallah, we'll continue after we come back from the program. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Double Reward. Inshallah, we're going to get back to Surah Al-Fatiha. Surah Al-Fatiha is considered by some to be a precise table of contents of the Qur'an. What that means is that all of the central messages of the Qur'an, all of its central aims are present in Surah Al-Fatiha. So you're probably thinking to yourself, wow, 7 verses to summarize 500 pages? How can that be? Well, the answer of course is yes, because these 7 verses are packed with so much meaning and so much profundity that it's very, very feasible and plausible. Let's look at some examples and see how that works. Well, the Qur'an is about, a very important part of what the Qur'an is about the good people and the people who Allah isn't pleased with, or the bad people. There are stories of prophets, there are stories of righteous people, and there are stories of unrighteous people and the enemies of the prophets. But this is mentioned and pointed to in Surah Al-Fatiha when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to say, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Guide us to the way of those upon whom you have bestowed grace, not those astray. So you're thinking, so who are the people that Allah bestowed grace on? Well, the answer is coming up in the Qur'an as you read on. Who are those that are astray? The answer to that question also is coming up in the Qur'an as you move forward. Another important thing about the Qur'an is teaching us about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God. What are His attributes? What are His signs, and what is He like? Well, this also is present in Surah Al-Fatiha when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the most merciful, the most gracious. So you can see that all of the messages and all of the aims, their kernels are present in Al-Fatiha. And as you become more familiar with the Qur'an, you'll realize that it's a summary, and you'll realize the close connection between Surah Al-Fatiha and the rest of the Qur'an. So the next time you read that surah, pay attention and say it with your heart. Now we're going to move on to something else, inshaAllah. We're going to move on to talking about the letters. But before we do that, we want to ask ourselves a question. What would happen if we had a building, but we didn't have a foundation for that building? Okay, let's ask our participants that question. Osama, suppose that you had a huge skyscraper with all these floors and there wasn't any foundation for the building. What would happen?
It would collapse.
It would collapse and it would fall down. Okay? Well, let me ask you another question. Suppose you had a doctor, for example, and this doctor didn't have any tools. He didn't have, a knife or scissors or any tools to work with. Firdaus, what do you think would happen to that doctor?
It couldn't cure the sickness of the patient.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So without a foundation and without your tools, you can't work. You can't progress. And inshallah, we're going to try to learn the rules of tajweed, but without the tools, without the letters, without the building blocks, we can't proceed. So that's why, inshallah, we're going to start at the beginning. We're going to start, inshallah, with alif. And try, inshallah, as we're learning it, to repeat as much as you can at home. Okay, so the first letter that's coming up on the screen is alif. And you can see that. Okay, let everybody here say alif.
Alif.
Okay, one more time, alif.
Alif.
Okay, now, there are three ways to pronounce this word. There is a, and there is e, and there is oo. Okay? Let's look at the first letter on the right. You see the line on top of the word? Do you see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
That line means a. Okay? Let's practice that. A. A. Good. Now let's move on to the next letter. You see it has a little green line beneath the letter? That means E. Say that with me. E.
E.
One more time. E. One more time. E.
E.
Okay. Now let's move on to the third letter. You see it's got this symbol. That symbol looks like a small noon, or a small waw, excuse me. That is pronounced oo. Okay, now let's say that all together. Oo.
Ooh.
One more time. Oo.
Ooh.
Good. That first mark is called fatha. Okay, we want to learn this word. Say fatha.
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 Okay. That second line, that green line that's on the bottom of the letter, that's called a kasra. Okay? Let's say that. Kasra.
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 Now that third mark, that red mark, is called a dhamma. Let's say that. Dhamma.
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 Okay, now repeat after me. Fatha,
Fatha.
kasra,
Kasra.
dhamma.
Dhamma.
These are the tools of the student who's learning tajweed. Fatha, kasra, dhamma. And as we said, with the first one you say a, the second one e, and the third one oo. Let's take some examples. Let's come up with a word that starts with that has an alif in the very beginning, that has a fatha on it. An example of a word would be abrar. Say that with me. Abrar.
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 Okay, that means righteous, people who are righteous. Okay? Now let's go back to that first letter that says a fatha on it. Remember we said it sounds like a. Can you see that fatha? Can you hear that fatha when we say abrar?
Yes.
Okay, let's say it one more time. Abrar.
Abrar.
Okay, let's move on to another example. Ibrahim. Okay, can you hear the fatha? Can you hear the E sound? Say that with me. Ibrahim.
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 Okay, let's take a third example. Ubath. Can you hear the dhamma there? U. Ubath. Say that with me. Ubath.
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 Okay, that's very good. Now let's move on to the next letter, inshallah. The next letter is ba. Say that with me. Ba.
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 Okay, and guess what? There are also 3 ways to pronounce ba. The first way is with a fatha, and it's that line that you see on top of the ba, that blue line on top of the ba. Okay, say ba. Say it with me. Ba.
Ba.
Now the second thing you see is b. Say that with me. B.
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 And the third one is boo.
Boo.
Say that with me. Boo.
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 Okay. Now I'm going to give you 3 examples, and try with your ear to hear the fatha, try to hear the kasra, and try to hear the dhamma. Okay? The first letter is bahr. Say that with me. Bahr.
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 Okay, Ahmed, what does the word bahr mean? Do you know?
Yes.
What does it mean?
Sea.
It means sea. Very good. Okay, can you hear the ba? Can you hear the fatha in that? Bahr.
Yes.
Okay.
Bahr.
Very good. Now let's move on to the second word, which is bism. Say that with me. Bism.
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 Can you hear the kasra?
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the third word, which is butun. Say that with me. Butun.
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 Good. Can you hear the dhamma? Can you hear the boo sound in butun?
Yeah.
Very good. And as you know, butun means stomach. Okay, let's move on to the next word, the next letter. The next letter is ta. Say that with me. Ta.
Ta.
One more time. Ta.
Ta.
One more time. Ta.
Ta.
Good. Now, that first mark is called a fatha. Let's come up with a word that starts with ta. That word would be talavva. Say that with me. Talavva. One more time. Talavva. Say it with me. Talavva.
Talazzo.
Talavva.
Talazzo.
Talavva.
Talazzo.
Okay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran is describing the fire, or describing the torment that is in hellfire. He describes the flame as a licking flame, or a very sharp flame. And that's what the word talavva means, which means to blaze. Let's move on to the next word, which is tilka. Say it with me. Tilka.
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 Okay. Can you hear the kasra in tilka?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Now the third word is tumla. Say it with me. Tumla.
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 Okay. Now it's very important to remember to listen for the fatha, the kasra, and the dhamma in these words. Let's move on to the next letter, which is the tha sound. Say it with me. Tha.
Fa.
Tha.
Fa.
Feiruz, I want to see you pronounce that letter a little bit more strongly. Why don't you try pulling the corners of your mouth back a little bit? Say tha.
Fa.
Tha.
Fa.
Okay, very good. Now, let's have a word that starts with a fatha. Thabit. Say that with me. Thabit.
Thabit.
Say it with me. Thabit.
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 Okay. Let's move on to the next one, which is a letter that starts with a kasra on it. Thiyab. Say it with me. Thiyab.
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 Osama, can you hear the kasra there in thiyab?
Yes.
Okay, very good. The third word is thuwiba. Say it with me. Thuwiba.
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 Can you all hear the dhamma? Ahmed, can you hear the dhamma there?
Yes.
Thuwiba?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Let's move on to the next word. And there's going to be a kind of tricky element here, or a very important lesson that we're going to learn, so pay attention. The next letter that you can see on your screen is the jeem. Say jeem. Say it with me. Jeem.
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 Okay. Now the first letter, as you can see, it has a line on top of it, and that's a fatha. So we're going to say ja. Say it with me. Ja.
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 Okay. The second letter that you see, and remember we're going from the right, is a kasra which is pronounced G. Can you say that with me? G.
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 Good. And the third letter you see is Ju. So say it with me. Ju.
Jew.
Ju.
Jew.
Ju.
Jew.
Okay. Now let's take some examples and pay attention here. The first letter we have is Jannah. Say it with me. Jannah.
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 And that means paradise. The second word we have, which has a kasra on it, is Jinnah. Say it with me. Jinnah.
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 Good. The third word has a dhamma on top of it, and it's pronounced Junnah. Say it with me. Junnah.
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 Okay. Now wait a minute. We've got the same word with three different pronunciations. One of them is Jannah, one of them is Jinnah, and the third one is Junnah. And guess what? All of those words are in the Quran, and all of them have completely different meanings. Okay? The first one, as we said, means paradise, Jannah. The third one, Junnah, means to protect, or as a shield. And then the second one means Jinnah, which means madness, or means craziness. So, you see those little marks, the fatha, the kasra, and the dhamma, they can change the meaning of the word completely which in turn can change the meaning of the sentence, which can in turn change the meaning completely to something totally different. You know, Fairuz, don't you think that's kind of a remarkable thing?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and what do you learn from that, or what does that make you feel like you have to do?
Well, I think it's very important to ponder over the pronunciation of the word actually, because if you pronounce it wrong, then the meaning goes wrong. So
Okay.
and then the whole verse can be meant wrongly actually. So you have to ponder on what you are reading, and you have to read it rightly.
Okay, that's very good. All right, now let's move on to the next letter, which you see on your screen, and that's ha. Let's say that all together. Ha,
Ha.
ha,
Ha.
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 Okay, now the first letter you see on your right, you see the ha, it has a line on top of it. Ahmed, what is that line called? The line on top of the letter.
Kasra.
Okay, let's ask a question here. Osama, do you agree? Do you agree that the line on top is a fatha, is a kasra?
No.
Okay, what is it?
Fatha.
Right, the line on top is a fatha. Do you agree, Firdaus?
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. The line on top is a fatha. The line on the bottom, that's a kasra. Okay? Do
Okay.
you see that, Ahmed?
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's move on to the next letter. You see the ha there. What does it have under it? It has a line under it. Now what is that called, Ahmed?
Kasra.
Good, good. Now the third letter that you see, that has a mark on it. Fairuz, can you tell us what that mark is called?
That is dhamma.
Dhamma. Okay. So the first one with the one on top is called a fatha. The one in the middle with the line on the bottom is called a kasra. And the third one is called a dhamma. Okay? Let's take some examples. Habba. Say it with me. Habba.
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 Let's move on to the next one, which is hisan.
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 Ahmed, let me hear you say that clearly. Hisan.
Hisan.
I want to hear, when you're pronouncing that ha sound, I want to hear a gentle kind of hissing or hoarse sound. I want to hear,
Okay.
I want to hear you say hisan.
Okay. Hisan.
Very good, very good. Because there's another letter, which is ha. Okay, so we want to make sure that those are different. And the last example is hub. Say it with me. Hub.
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 Firdaus, do you know what the word hub means?
Love.
It means love. Okay, that's enough inshaAllah, and we're going to continue and pick up the letters inshaAllah in the next episode. Assalamu alaikum, and don't forget to practice at home. See you next time inshaAllah.